Thank you. So we, what did we talk about last 2 days? Anybody want to give a quick summary? So what are the 4 pillars of blockchain? And so security, transparency, immutability, and decentralization. Those are the 4 pillars. And then we also looked at why businesses would use blockchain. So we were looking at validation, security, smart contracts, etc. And then we also looked briefly at the types of blockchain, public, private, and what's the main difference, consortium, hybrid. And so today we are going to continue further. And we'll also, hopefully either today or definitely tomorrow, we'll also look at the proof consensus mechanisms. And also Mr. Afzal started talking about trilemma. So we are actually going to cover it also in this course, probably tomorrow. It's kind of like a dilemma which has 3 aspects, so this is called trilemma instead of dilemma, that kind of thing. So we are going to be looking at we started talking about why organizations need blockchain, and typically it's a security situation. So what are those security challenges that organizations face where blockchain can address those concerns? So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So what are the typical issues? I think, have most of you taken any course in cybersecurity or something? Okay. Do we know what cybersecurity is?
Protecting computers from threats.
So basically anything that you do that is on telecommunication network, which is pretty much everything, right? From your using your messaging, connecting with your friends and family, your school work, your your banking, and everything is through the internet connection. So all our activities, some of those are just for entertainment, but some of those are personal and financial and commercial. The internet, we were looking at public and private pair keys. Oh, I forgot to look up the names of those 3 gentlemen. So it's protected, it's usually secure, but as we know, nothing is 100% secure because there are always loopholes. So cybersecurity is the field in the information system that focuses on how do you make these things secure, what kind of attacks can happen, and how do you prevent them from happening. Every day we hear about something or the other, and I know that every time I open the radio there is always this announcement about how to protect yourself from getting fake calls or fake videos and this scam and that scam. All of that is part of cybersecurity challenges. So typically, believe it or not, most of the cybersecurity, majority of those attacks happen insider. You have a disgruntled employee, somebody was fired, they feel that they deserve justice, but they are unable to get that justice, so then they want to take revenge. So usually those are the kinds of things, or the other is the human error. So even if you secure everything, it's kind of like, you lock the door, but if you forget to lock the door, then doesn't matter how good your lock is, it's not gonna make any difference. So same thing, if the employees within the organization are not trained properly or not aware, then hackers and bad actors take advantage of that, and that's usually the largest number of cyber attacks originate from insider. It's very rare because usually the systems are pretty secure, so somebody has to be very sophisticated hacker, like we hear about Russians or Chinese are hacking, but they are very sophisticated machines, right? I mean, and I'm sure even the US and India, all governments do that to each other. So the centralized databases are usually very attractive for a reason that once they are able to get in, They can scoop out everything that's on it because pretty much everything is stored on these databases. It's not distributed typically. Have you heard of ransomware attacks? Everybody, I hope you don't get to experience personally. Where I am in Monterey Bay, we have this community college, and the whole college was held up on this ransomware, and they actually had to pay the money before the hackers would release their system for them to continue their work. And these days everything is on computer, right? I mean, I have to log into my computer to even just check my email. So you can imagine how disruptive it can be. So it's very, very common. Phishing, of course, that's very common. Usually we all get emails or mobile messages that, you know, or phone calls. If you don't do this, the police will show up on your door, kind of thing. So those are phishing. And when talking in the context of cyber attacks, have you heard of social engineering?
Yes.
So anybody want to tell me what that is about?
Taking the information of a particular person and taking somewhere, collecting all those things, and then we are doing some changing our data and taking access from that.
Right, thank you. So do any of you know personally whose password is 123456? My sister, and she's a Delhi High Court judge. Now she is, because I keep after her, so she has changed her password. But we all know so many people who don't understand the technology and don't understand the threats to it. So they thought, "Me password hai to, you know, how does it make a difference? Because it's so hard for me to remember." Or they'll make a password and then write it and put it on their computer right there or in their wallet, so they remember what is the PIN for their debit card, or things like that, because it is hard to remember all these things, and we have password for pretty much everything these days. So it's humanly not possible, and that's exactly what hackers are taking advantage of. And even if they can't access your computer to see the chit you have there or your wallet, they know that people like to talk about themselves on the Facebook or social media, and from that they can gather a lot of information, because a lot of people, to make things easy for them to remember, they will use their pet's name or their kid's name or grandkid's name or their date of birth, and so if a hacker spends enough time trolling, they can figure out what are the likely passwords for most people. So even if you are security conscious, you might unconsciously be giving away what your passwords are. So those are the things that get into phishing, and social engineering is what it is called. So obviously it's a huge impact, right? Identity loss. I don't know here, but in US I know a couple of people whose identities were stolen, and once that is done, it takes humongous amount of gargantuan effort to just get it straight, because all the legal paperwork, and you have to prove that you are you and not that person who has stolen and how do you go about proving it? So it's a whole thing. So very, very problematic. So what are the specific security issues that blockchain could help with? So we have talked about data integrity and tampering. So because of the decentralized nature of blockchain, it makes it much harder to scoop out all the data. And of course the immutability, right? Once the data enters into blockchain, even the legitimate participants can't change the data. Forget about the hacker or somebody else, right? So that is a very good property which makes it attractive for a lot of these issues. Yesterday, I think Mr. Afzal, somebody asked that question, and he said that, yeah, you can't change it, which can be a good thing, which is a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. Immutability, basically, I think once the data is recorded, it cannot be altered. And then how it is done, I think we have talked about this enough already. The cryptographic hash, I'm sure everybody is dreaming of it now. We've talked about it so much. And So there is cryptographic algorithms that are used. Chained blocks. So the idea is that changes in one block would disrupt the entire chain. Therefore, that makes it very, very difficult. And of course, consensus mechanisms. If most actors are honest and are driven by incentives and keeping the chain pure, then likelihood of a bad actor disrupting it is very, very infinitesimally small. Fraud prevention, audit trail. Sometimes that is very useful. So you know exactly who did what at what time. And in the real world, we have talked about the applications are in medicines, medical fields, and of course, agribusiness, supply chain management, finance, and so on. There are always challenges, right? The whole thing about immutable ledgers is that error management becomes a nightmare because human beings do make error. Maybe Alice wanted to send Bob 10 bitcoins rather than 5, but once the transaction is done, you can't change it. So you have to do another set of transactions to make corrections, which sometimes is possible, but other times it may not be possible. So mistakes remain permanently recorded. So that is a downside of using blockchains. I think somebody yesterday was talking about, during the break we were talking about, and they were asking that question about financial related things. So that's exactly what it is. Once data is entered, we can't change it. The other big challenge is the scalability. We talked about, I think on one of the slides on the day one, that how many transactions can take place in a blockchain versus in a regular traditional system. And it's a exponential difference. I mean, Bitcoin operations, you can only do so many, 7 transactions. But obviously in e-commerce, if you are a bank, I mean, you're not doing 7 transactions, you're doing 7 million perhaps, if depending on how big you are. So you can't use blockchain for recording all this. So you need a different system. So that's the problem that is currently in blockchain. And a lot of new solutions are being proposed, a lot of new work is coming in, a lot of research is going on. I think Mr. Afzal was mentioning something about, if not, this is the kind of thing you should ask Mr. Vinay Pandey, that how does his company address the question of scalability for his clients, or is it that his clients are only doing business which does not require scalability, right? So which one is it, and what's happening out there? And the larger the blockchain is, harder it becomes to, in terms of the time it takes to do something, because of the computational demand and latency. When something happens and when something actually gets recorded, that's the difference that's called latency. So time verification. So the actual transaction might have taken place at, let's say, 7 a.m. But by the time the transaction gets recorded, it might be 10 minutes later or 20 minutes later. So there is that could become an issue. Privacy versus transparency. I think we have talked about this before. Anyone has any questions on it? That maybe that's the way we can approach this. No? Do we understand what's the debate here? Okay. And of course, we haven't talked much about the legal and regulatory compliance, but that is what's happening in this country or this province or this state or this municipality may not necessarily be applicable in another location. So how do you take that into account is another thing. So cost and resource requirement. We always forget that anything that is sophisticated and gives us a lot of benefits is usually more expensive also and more complex also, and blockchain certainly is. It is not an easy area to get into even for entrepreneurs, because it requires not just computer science or mathematics or statistics, but also legal understanding, the compliance understanding, the business domain understanding, and of course psychology always plays a role. So the major thing that is happening now is the consumption of the electricity that is required is more. I mean, if you were just, can you think of how much more the world is spending in electricity since the blockchain has happened and since the Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies are floating around than otherwise. And it is a concern, but who is going to address that concern? Nobody knows, right? Everybody is aware of it, but you also need the thing. So again, that's a, pros and cons of each. The other thing that I think is that smaller organizations typically get left out because they don't have as much resources to spare. And that's why I think this would be another thing to talk to Mr. Pandey about. The government, at least the government of India, is doing this STPI type of thing to encourage entrepreneurs. But how is that also a requirement, or how do they help smaller businesses who don't have the wherewithal of companies like Reliance or Walmart's or IBM's, right? So what does that mean long term? Are the bigger businesses going to get even bigger and smaller businesses just going to die out because they can't compete, because they don't have the cost? Or are there initiatives from the government which are designed to level the playing field a little bit more, so that these smaller organizations which are doing good work but they don't have the resources but they have the same security needs as the big organization, how do you support them so they don't die out in the long term? So for those of you who are in socially oriented here, those are the kinds of things to ponder. Maybe in your research, those are the kinds of things you can incorporate. That all these technologies, what is their impact in the social aspect, smaller organizations, and so on, and what is the role of the government, what is the role of the society in figuring that out, so that it's not just a monopoly or oligarchy as it is called, where only a few big organizations pretty much control everything, which seems to be happening more and more, isn't it? So, and of course GIGO, right? Those of you in computer science, you probably know this, garbage in, garbage out. So in a chain, if error or something wrong information is entered, it's there forever. So how do you prevent that from happening? So as a business or as an individual in a business, what are the processes do you have in place to ensure that before the data is entered into the blockchain, how are you making sure that it's error free? Somebody has to there has to be a process. You can't just assume that it would be error free. So those are the kinds of mechanisms from the management side in the business are required. So forking and ledger fragmentation. So this by itself is one of those fields which is, you can keep diving and very intense. So we are just going to gloss over very quickly just to understand what is it. So what is it is that we talked about blockchains work on consensus mechanisms, right? Everybody has to agree. So what happens if people don't agree? For some reason there is some transaction that there is disagreement over. Or maybe two transactions of the similar type are colliding and then they can't decide which one to enter into the blockchain. So that is called as can lead to forks. Basically, then you decide, okay, and there has to be a protocol for it, because you can't keep forking, you can't keep creating new versions of the chain, because after a while then everybody is creating their own version of chain, then you forget about which one is the original. But at some point, sometimes that may be necessary. So that's what it is called as forking. So obviously it can create confusion over which one is the right version of the ledger. It's just like, in a bank, if every teller decided to have their own ledger entry for the same account, then after a while the bank, if it is audited, it can't decide, was this ledger entry the correct one or was this ledger entry the correct one. So if it happens, then how is it resolved? That's part of the protocol and the network rules in a blockchain, and something that have to be thought about before and laid out before. So this was an example. So Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, due to disagreements, so then I think Bitcoin survived. Maybe during the break we can look and Google what happened to Bitcoin Cash, because I've never heard of it since then. So are we ready for some discussion? And we can also get some water or something, or chai. Mil sakti hai kya? My throat is dry. I'm sorry, it's too early. Is there smoke here or is just me? There is some. Okay, so here is what we want to talk about. I would like you to imagine that you are running a company of your choice, which has some security issue, right? So the question is, what are the things, let's not get into too much detail. Let's say, what are the 2 or 3 things that you need to think about in your organization before implementing blockchain that will smooth out some of the issues that we have talked about? Do you want to do that? Yes? No? Okay. How about we do a small group discussion on that? Would that be more helpful? Okay, do you want to take 5 minutes? I don't know, I don't think these can turn. So just talk to your neighbor, whoever is your neighbor, and just think about 3 things that you would like to consider for the organization of your choice, which you want to be successful in implementing blockchain, based on the discussion we've had so far. आप लोग डिस्कस नहीं करते हैं वैसे. You guys are loners. You like to think alone, huh? And what you can do is we can combine the discussion question 1 and 2 in your answer. So the second part is about the hybrid solution. Hybrid solution is that partially the data is off blockchain and part of it is on blockchain. And if so, think for your particular organization, what kind of data should be offline and what kind of data should be on blockchain. So let's have a discussion, and I would like to hear from at least 4 or 5 groups about what their thoughts are. Okay? Loners here. Let's take a couple more minutes and then we'll have a call out. One more minute and then we'll do the discussion. Okay, so I know you probably have a lot more ideas and lot more to discuss, but let's take a pause and let's hear what's on your mind. Yes, sir.
For any organization, the bottom line is
Shh, everybody, let's make sure we can hear.
profit. So if we are implementing blockchain in our business or in our organization, the first thing we should be, it should be affordable and should be matching towards the bottom line of our organization.
Okay.
Second thing, it is complicated, so we should have that employee which have the training in that, so they can take care of it, because it is impossible to make an alteration and changes in a blockchain.
Okay.
And third is one of the important that it is required a lot of energy to use such type of system, so there should be a proper supply of energy.
And budget for it, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think that one applies to pretty much all. Okay, so thank you for this group.
And adding to these points, there is one other point that where the organization is set up, they should comply with the rules and regulation of that area, region, or that country. The blockchain should manage with the rules and regulations of that area.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I think that also applies to pretty much everybody.
Tea with sugar or without sugar?
Any without sugar.
Without.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I'm having tea as I'm going to talk, but I need it. Thank you. Besides that, anybody want to address some other points? Yes.
Type of transaction, whether you are in a banking sector or a normal, how much data you want to transfer.
Okay. So scalability, any data that is going to require faster transaction speeds is not something that you should be putting on the blockchain, because your blockchain is going to be much slower than the normal other systems. Okay. That gentleman and then that gentleman.
Data validation should be there, so there should be a team of experts who are validating this data which is getting into the immutable blockchain. Else, it will be just a case of garbage in and garbage out.
Very good. So that is something that as an organization, and remember this will be an added cost, right? So if you're an organization considering this, a lot of times they don't think about all of these things that also would need to be done to make a new technology work better. So this would be another example of added cost that you need to budget for if you're going to have a process in place for somebody or a team of people to make sure the data entered is correct. So very good. You had your hand up?
We should be more domain specific. That is, we should be able to first enhance our prerequisite knowledge and find out the gaps. Like for example, we have the mark sheet of different kinds of sets of data that we have to fill in, and then we should work accordingly.
Okay.
Can be tampered. That will be implemented using this technology, like Maxi.
Mark sheets, yeah, right.
Assets, like then taxes, who, what we pay, what we do, like policies, these which we can tamper that data, not all data.
Not all data. So in other words, you have to think about, this is the second thing about the hybrid solution, which is what a lot of companies are moving towards as a practical way to incorporate blockchain, at the same time not slow their systems down. So they are deciding upon which data should be in blockchain and which can be managed without it. And of course, that also is not a trivial thing, because you have to manage two types of system. They have to be able to communicate seamlessly. It's not like, you know, you're going to do batch processing. Okay, by this evening we'll have this data and then we are going to upload it to blockchain. It's not like that.
Apart from development for social sector, like police verification or like that, or the getting the history of criminal or like that, blockchain can be created, but it may be costly.
Right. So if it is a permissioned blockchain, I think that's what you might be referring to, the private ones.
Yeah.
If you have the participants in that, then as an organization, you better have safeguards and full verification that this person is not a criminal, that you are giving permission to enter into the private blockchain or a hybrid blockchain. So yeah, very good point. Excellent discussion. Anybody else have one last point? Yeah, go ahead.
Ma'am, we can provide hybrid solution using blockchain and other traditional ways. The first thing we have to consider is whenever an organization is dealing with external factors like manufacturers, suppliers, the government, and any of the stakeholders that lie outside the organization, then we can use blockchain technology. And if we are dealing with the internal factors such as human resource and the board of directors and other, then we can use traditional methods.
So that, in other words, the organization has to figure that out, what is critical enough for them to be on the blockchain despite it slow, despite it being immutable, that things can be changed later on and so on. And what are the things that they can deal with the normal cybersecurity threats that most organizations face, because it gives them speed and meets their needs. Very good. Excellent. All right. So then what are we doing next? We continue this conversation. So again, we were talking about security issues, decentralization. It spreads the data on multiple nodes, right? So it eliminates a single point of failure. I think we talked about this on day one already. We have transactions that are validated by consensus mechanisms, so that makes unauthorized changes very, very difficult, which can be very, very helpful in financial and sensitive industries, sensitive data. Advanced encryption, and of course financial services are, that's where blockchains shine. So I think I'm going to skip this, right? We kind of are already talked about this. There's a lot of decentralization I put in there. Okay, that's all right. So this one is just revisiting what we have been talking about. There is no central authority, and it's distributed on peer-to-peer network. And the real world examples, I think again we've talked about this enough, Bitcoin, supply chain management, etc. So I think we are all familiar with what is decentralization at this point. I think let's skip this. Okay, so here is an example of lack of transparency and trust. What does that mean in a scenario? So just like that mango case we were talking about yesterday, if the mangoes have gone bad, the farmer might try to change or falsify the record when they were harvested, things like that. There was this scandal by does anybody remember in 2015, a lot of you might have been in maybe middle school or something, so you may not remember. But Volkswagen, which is a car company in Germany, and they make the Volkswagen and a lot of other cars, and it's very highly branded name, like trustworthy brand. And then suddenly it came out that they had been falsifying the records of their car emissions, and that they took a huge hit in their brand reliability and trust, because that's the reason. Remember, we were talking about that big companies, they are more scared of damage to their brand more than the actual monetary damage. So they basically were cheating the regulators, customers, and investors. Essentially, that's what was happening. And since then, they've been trying to, re-image, rebrand themselves. But Enron scandal, again, this was before probably many of you were born. The lack of transparency in financial reporting was a huge scandal at the time. And of course, these things keep happening. In real estate transactions, we see that all the time, right? Somebody bought something and then, no, this was not the price we agreed on, or no, it also need this or that added, and so on and so forth. So ownership of assets is a huge, huge business which requires lot of protection and security. So let's see. So I think at this point I'm going to skip this one because we kind of know how blockchain can address these issues, right? Any questions so far? So we are still continuing with the theme of lack of transparency and trust. So we know what immutable records mean, and we know that companies in healthcare, they can benefit from blockchain application, and in financial institutions and financial companies also. So transparency, we talked about this, that blockchain by its very design is transparent because everybody has a copy of the ledger and everybody can see what's in that ledger, which is not typically what happens. Only the Munimji has the ledger, right? So if the farmer comes, remember those old movies where they would basically, you know, so some of you know what I'm talking about. So that's a huge leap because it's we don't even think about certain things, but that's the way things have been. So you don't even ask, okay, I need to see all the ledgers. I'm feeling bad now. Can और लोगों के लिए भी चाय दे सकती है अगर किसी को चाहिए तो?
मैम अभी तो यही है।
अच्छा ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं। So having transparency is important. Not only from the business point of view, but from a social point of view also, because then suddenly you have access to the information that you did not have before, right? You can see what other people or what kind of transactions, the amount of things that are happening, or what the rest of the world is doing. So you are not just in your bubble anymore. You are able to look out, and therefore more information usually means a little bit more power at our disposal. In real world application, they're designing these systems. For example, Votes is a blockchain based voting platform that ensures transparency in electoral processes. So whether or not the governments adopt it, of course, remains to be seen. But we talked about Estonia, for example, one of the small countries in the Russian far east of the Europe region. For charitable donations, this is another thing, right? I mean, we all like to give to charity because we feel good, right? We are helping somebody. But most of the time we don't know what percentage of our donation actually goes towards the charity, and the rest is eaten up in administrative or marketing or other kinds of things. So having that level of transparency is always helpful. It might actually make people give more if they know that the higher percentage is going, and it might also reduce the cost of that organization such as UNICEF, and therefore get more donations. So it becomes that virtuous cycle instead of a vicious cycle. So this is again just a quick look again at the things we've been talking about a lot, the private keys, public keys, and cryptography. Did I mention the book by The Code by Simon Singh? I would again recommend for those of you, it's very well written. It's written in a way that is, even if you don't know anything about information system or cryptography or algorithms or anything, you can understand. It's very well written. So I highly recommend it. It's an old book, 2001 or 99 it came out, but still relevant. So blockchain uses, I think we already know, SHA 256, public and private keys, digital signatures, and consensus mechanism. So we know what each of those three function is in the overall working of a blockchain. And of course, we know that they are being used in cryptocurrencies, smart contracts, and so on. Do we need to go through this? Okay, thank you. All right, so this is just kind of summarizing the advantages of blockchain versus the traditional system. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds while I take a couple of sips of my tea. Thank you. Anything here that doesn't make sense or is unusual? Can we move forward? Okay. I know I've been promising to give you the slides, and the reason I have not been able to give you the slides is that I have not been given access to that Google space where apparently I'm supposed to put the slides. So till somebody gives me that access, unfortunately I won't be able to do that. So we don't have to do this right now. We can do this during break. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So this is our favorite time of the day, right? It is mine. Okay, so which of the following best describes decentralization in blockchain? Excellent. Distribution of control across multiple nodes in a peer-to-peer network. Okay, we ready for the second one? How does blockchain ensure immutability? Okay, so by linking blocks using cryptographic hashes and requiring consensus for changes. What is the primary benefit of transparency in blockchain? So are transactions hidden? No. Are transactions anonymous and untraceable? No. No, but we do know that they can, it's visible to everybody. Has the ledger, right? It's the ledger day. Okay. Which cryptographic feature is used to secure transactions in blockchain? Very good. You guys are listening then. That makes me feel happy. Okay, what happens if someone attempts to alter a block in the blockchain? I know it's a little bit hard to read. So are the changes immediately reflected across all nodes? No. The entire blockchain is invalidated and requires recreation? Nope. The hash of this change is rejected. Anytime there is a slight change, remember this was one of the properties of the cryptographic hash when we talked about on day one. If you make a slight change, it results in a new hash, and any new hash is a signal to everybody somebody is trying to tamper with the blockchain and is immediately rejected, hence making the blockchain secure. Okay. So now we are going to take a closer look. What time is it? Okay. So just to summarize, I think we talked about fraudulent transactions. We all are aware of what that means, right? Payments, contracts, identity management, and it costs billions of dollars, and a lot of businesses have that written off as part of doing business because there is only so much an organization can do. So at some point they have to say, okay, we'll just, this is part of our cost, and we just move on. And that is the other thing in real time. Where do you think this might be more of an issue? The ability to prevent fraud in real time. Which industry or which scenario do you think where it becomes a critical issue? Financial, but also remember we were talking about critical infrastructure like electricity grid, water grid, nuclear grade airplane flight management, all of those things are critical because it's life and death. It's not just a question of money anymore, but you're talking about widespread damage and things like that. So there are certain places where this is more of an issue, and therefore those are the places where the concerned entities and organizations are considering, and that's why all of this innovation happens, because there is a need, it's not getting fulfilled, so other people come in with new ideas and new technologies and new algorithms and new ways to solve these problems. So in e-commerce, blockchain prevents fraudulent chargebacks, like I never paid this, or this has actually happened. This happens a lot. Somebody would buy something online and then they would call their bank and say, I never purchased that thing, please cancel this charge for me. So although the banks have some ways of preventing that, but they can't always prevent, especially if it is small enough amounts, because it's a question of return on investment. How much time and effort does a bank want to spend on these smaller kind of claims versus focusing on their resources on their critical core competencies? So that those are the kinds of things that can be prevented in blockchain solutions. The other thing is inefficiency in access control and identity management. So identity management has to do with authentic. Going back to this Alice and Bob scenario, is Alice really the person Alice, or is it somebody else masquerading as Alice? And same with Bob. So that's this authenticity, and that goes back to again cryptography, public and private chains. So here is an example that is closer to our hearts, education. We are all in the education. So universities can issue blockchain based digital credentials that the students can share with employers, and the employers know that it is this student who has earned that badge and not somebody else who was sitting in the seminar and took the test on their behalf, you know, things like that, which do happen. So in education industry, this is happening, and who was I talking to? I think Mr. Vinay only. He was talking about that he's working on a project about this in terms of grades, mark sheets, and so on, and applying blockchain solution to it, so the mark sheets cannot be altered and things like that. And of course, in supply chain management, the moment you're relying on third parties, you open yourself up to more security issues, because more people are involved. Remember, the number one threat in cybersecurity is the people, the persons, consciously or unconsciously. Some of that is unconsciously. They may not even know that they are creating a cybersecurity risk for the organization, but nevertheless, that is what happens. So what happened to this? During the break, can we take a look at it? We don't have to do this now. So pharmaceutical companies, everybody know what pharmaceutical companies? Okay, so this is very important, right? The drugs, we know all about counterfeit drugs, counterfeit vaccines, and all kinds of things. So for pharmaceutical companies, it becomes very critical that if they are producing a drug as, let's say aspirin, it's reaching the consumer as aspirin by that company and not something else got substituted in the bottle. So very, very critical for them. Regulatory compliance and auditability. So there are several laws in United States. This medical field has the law of HIPAA, which is privacy. That, for example, only a parent can know about a child's illness, but if the person is over 18, even their parents and nobody else can be disclosed their condition without the explicit permission from the patient. So there are all of these laws that come into the being, and some of you talked about this during our discussion. So in the blockchain the audit trail becomes much harder to break, and therefore in finance, in healthcare, import export. I have a friend and her husband, they work with Government of India on training government offices across the world on import export, that if you are importing something from country X, what are the rules and regulations of this country that you have to comply, and all of that. And they have a lot of experience in meeting, and they know all about the fraud and bribery and all kinds of things that go on the custom, right? We all have seen movies, right? So it's a huge thing, and if it is small, if it is things that are not going to cause any damage, maybe that's okay. But we know that this dual use technology, what that refers to is innocent looking items, but when they are assembled together can create havoc. So for example, you might be importing fertilizer separately, nitrogen separately, some other items separately, so they are being imported as separate items, so they are not dangerous items, but once they are in one location, they can be assembled together to create homemade bombs. So there is no way for governments to track how much quantities of these kind of dual use technologies, that's what they call. Same thing with even remote controls and things. Maybe somebody is just importing remote controls because, hey, we are, you know, I produce I'm supplying it to TV person or retailer and so on. So there are blockchains being developed that that basically are designed to be able to can I just would you mind actually not talking so loudly? Thank you. These systems are designed that they can identify, first of all, what are the items that can be dual use, and then tracking those specifically and making sure that they are not being routed in some way where somebody has a potential to put them all together for nefarious use. So this is a big thing, and it was quite fascinating for me because I'm not in that field at all, right? You know, we don't deal with customs and so on. So it was fascinating for me to see how much technology is being used in these customs and import and export, because you think these are all boring things. They don't use any technology. They're just signing papers and so on, but pretty amazing. And of course, we all have to deal with this know your customer, right? Every few years we have to update. So is there a way to do this which is not so cumbersome for individuals and easy for the system or the banks or financial institutions to also know that, yes, this is a customer that you are supposedly dealing with? So that is what is called as the identity management also. Insider threat, that is what I was talking about before. Most of these threats are enabled by people working within the system, and they have access to sensitive system, and organizations really have a hard time because, you know, they are not holding up a flag, hey, I'm the insider threat to your organization. They are working very quietly, and most of the time it's they are undetected. So because of the blockchain's distributed ledger, it basically ensures that no one person has control over the system. Because the moment you are the one who is supposed to sign the file to move forward, right? We've all heard that case, that this is the person who has to approve something for something else to happen. But the moment you take away that authority or that power, then the system becomes less prone to these kind of disruptions from internal. And for obvious reason, government agencies are very interested in blockchain solutions because they do deal with a lot of sensitive and potentially dangerous situations. So going further, I think we kind of know about payment fraud and fraud reduction. cryptocurrency. So I'm going to move to the next slide. Distributed denial of service. Anybody experienced that or read about it? Because this happens quite often. Sometimes you'll find you're on Instagram or Facebook and suddenly it's not available, the service is not available, right? Or Amazon. And typically what has happened is that the server, because these are the servers, huge servers that are constantly getting all these requests that, you know, when you press things on your mobile or your computer, that request is sent to the server to process. Sometimes some entity, hacker or entity would send so many requests at the same time to the servers that the servers get overwhelmed. It's beyond their capacity to process these, so they shut down, right? So when that happens, it's called as distributed denial of service, and it causes huge disruptions and downtime. So you can imagine for a small company, maybe it's okay because their customers are so few and far between that the disruption doesn't cause any damage. But for banks or a company like Amazon or any of those kind of companies, even a 1-minute disruption can be huge in terms of cost, right? So that's why you have these not only just servers, but the backup of the server and backup of the backup and backup of the backup. Sometimes it's 10 backups deep, simply to be able to deal with these kind of attacks, that if the servers is getting overwhelmed, that the backup servers, they don't lose the data at least, and they can pick it up where it left off and all kinds of things. But this is a very, very common thing because it's very easy to do. All you need is a computer and a telecommunication internet service and some sophistication to bombard a particular company with these kind of requests. So blockchain solution, because of its decentralized nature, it becomes less susceptible. It doesn't mean it's not susceptible, it's just less susceptible. And so content delivery networks is another thing. It's a new thing. I'm not going to go into the details beyond the scope of our course here, but something for us to know that blockchains are more robust in handling the distributed denial of service attacks. So decentralization, immutability, transparency, and security. These are the 4 pillars that we talked about of blockchain, and that's what makes it more attractive for organizations to adopt blockchain to deal with their security issues. So more cybersecurity and more trust and transparency. I'm going to take a quick pause here just to check how are we doing. Any questions? Are we learning anything new this morning or more of the same? A little bit of more of the same, I know. Hopefully, thank you. Okay, so this is just summary of what we have been talking about. So good for international trade. They can reduce entry barriers. So can somebody tell me how can blockchain reduce entry barriers? We had an example yesterday in our midst. I don't know if that gentleman is here today or not. Remember the person we spoke to, he said he is investing and trading in Bitcoin, right? Just a regular person with internet connection and computer and a little bit of knowledge. That would not have necessarily been possible in the traditional trading scenario, because you need to know, you need to be part of a company such as trading company or something like that in order for you to be able to invest so quickly in something that is so new, right? I know there are individual traders in the stock market, but we're talking about things like cryptocurrency and something so new. So it does reduce the barrier to entry, does not eliminate it, of course, because we talked about before that in private blockchains especially, it's harder for smaller businesses to get in unless you're part of the network. And also we talked about the cost and complexity of blockchain systems, so sometimes that can be intimidating for smaller businesses. So let's see, this is basically just talking about the same thing. Anything here in the bold that anybody have any question about or they don't understand? Okay, so I think some of these slides I copied over from day one, so that's why we have some repetition, but that's okay. So here again a quick summary of how the blockchain works. Just to summarize, a transaction is initiated, broadcast to the network. The nodes or the miners verify the transaction through cryptography, and verified transactions are combined to create a new block. The block is added to the existing chain, forming an unalterable record, and then all participants can view the completed transaction. So that's essentially the basic summary of how blockchain works. So now we are going to move into the blockchain consensus mechanisms. Okay, we talked a little bit about the proof of work before, but there are other mechanisms. So we are going to take a quick overview of these as well. Do you guys need a quick break or something? A 2, 3, 4, 5 minute break? Okay, let's do a 5-minute break and then we'll come back. 5 minutes only. Okay, you guys get up, stretch, get some water. I know washrooms are around here somewhere, so but please be back here in 5 minutes. हाँ
अगला ब्रेक भी होगा?
मेरे ख्याल से क्या बजा है अभी, वैसे तो 11 बजे होना था ना, तो हो सकता है 5-10 मिनट, क्योंकि मैं ये वाला सेक्शन ख़त्म करना चाह रही थी. इज़ दैट ओके? हाँ 11, हाँ हाँ 11:15 का रख लीजिए, ठीक है. हाँ, इज़ 11:15 ओके फॉर द ब्रेक? ओके, थैंक यू. So we are going to start on the section where we are going to look at what are the different consensus mechanisms. Do we remember what the consensus mechanism is used for in blockchain? So any new transaction, please. Very good. So we need to make sure that as participants get a new transaction broadcast, how do we decide that it has to be added to the blockchain? So there are different ways of going about it. But basically the process is ensure agreement about among distributed nodes. Everybody settled now? Good. So the consensus mechanism is to ensure that there is agreement among distributed nodes so that the transaction can be validated and added to the blockchain. So obviously if this process is cumbersome or long, that means the amount of time it takes to add to the transaction is going to be much longer and therefore slower. So obviously as a blockchain developer, and this is something I think you should also discuss with or ask Mr. Vinay Pandey later on, that what is their speeds in the transaction consensus mechanism and how does it compare to the traditional system, and perhaps he can provide us with some sort of in the ground reality of what's happening. Yes.
If we need to do a particular transaction in a blockchain, then we have to move through all the blocks in that order, in that order.
Tell me again what your question is.
If we want to move to a particular transaction, then we move through the whole chain to reach that transaction. Everything directly to that block only.
So it's the latest block that is
Earlier transaction.
earlier block. They are done. You can't touch them. They are just there. That's just there for historical purpose. It's a ledger. Those are old entries. So the new entry, the new transaction, that is what every node is now going to work on to validate or not validate. Does that answer your question?
I just want to look at the old transactions.
Okay.
To the whole blockchain.
If you want to, but the way, remember when we were talking about, let's say Bob has only 2 bitcoins left, right? That's the latest transaction, and Alice had, I forget now, let's say 19 left. So if there is a new transaction involving Bob or Alice, all you need to do is look at the last transaction where Bob appeared or Alice appeared. You don't have to look at the previous ones. It's kind of just like accounting ledger. It keeps track of what is the latest resources or assets each participant has, and is it enough to spend, is it more than what the transaction is about or not. So that's the first thing. If not, it's rejected. So that is what all of this process is about. Does that answer your question? So the question is, so we are talking about ensuring agreement for validity of the transaction so it can be added. So how do miners reach consensus in transaction history? So it's so we are this is where it gets into the game theory and more very sophisticated statistics. So we are not going to get into it, but basically the idea is that there are algorithms in place that are used to provide the to reach the consensus, and there is an economic incentive for the miners to do that work to reach the consensus, right? And we looked at that example. Different networks may have different incentives. It depends on whether it's public or it's private. Is it in supply chain or banking, or is it consortium or hybrid? So they may have different set of rules and different incentives, or none, right? So usually miners are compensated for their proof of work. Hanji. Sorry? That's pre-decided. Those are the network rules. Is that your question? How much? So that is decided by whichever blockchain you are participating in. Then they would have the rules already set that for the incentives are this much, and or every time this happens, this is the incentive. If it is variable, that also would be set. Sometimes it may depend on perhaps the amount of transaction, or sometimes it may be just a flat fee type of thing.
Is it possible that a transaction having two transactions having same amount have two different minor fees?
Two different minors?
Minor fee. If a transaction having same amount, if there are two transactions and they are of same amount, can these transactions carry different minor fee?
It depends. So it's a transaction, whether, so first of all, if there are multiple transactions, they are all processed one by one. So first, whichever came the first transaction, and there is a line perhaps, whichever came first, so it's first in, first out. So this transaction will be taken care of first through the consensus mechanism, and then whatever the fees are set, whether it's based on the amount or a flat fee, would be given to that miner. Then the next transaction, it doesn't matter if it is the same amount or a different amount. So it depends on the rules of the blockchain that have already been set, and participants should know that when they enter into that blockchain, what the rules are and what are the incentive mechanisms. Does that answer? Okay. So the purpose of this is that there is agreement on the single version of the truth, meaning there is one ledger, not multiple ledgers floating around. So at any given point in time, you know exactly what that ledger is, or what all the transactions that have been validated. Because if you have multiple ledgers, like we were talking about in forking earlier, defeats the whole purpose. Then you get into the confusion, which participant has the latest version, which participant has a different version, and so on. So that will not work. It also, we talked about the double spending a lot on day one, and I think yesterday also, and we talked about tampering also all 3 days. And achieving fault tolerance, basically even if some nodes are faulty or malicious, based on the game theory model and probabilistic model, that if the chain is long enough, even if there are bad actors, they are not going to be able to keep pace with the rate at which new valid blocks are being added versus trying to break the chain. So that is one of the big advantages of how blockchain can provide the security, and the major reason why it is being adopted across different industries. So key steps, just very quickly, I think we talked about somebody initiates the somebody initiates the transaction, then the nodes verify the validity of the transaction. Do you remember how we did that? Those public and private keys, signing. Which one do we need for verifying the signature? Private key. Very good. You guys are excellent at this. So once it is validated, a block is formed, a new block is formed. This block consists of a bunch of valid transactions. It's usually not a single transaction, so you don't have a block for every single transaction. How many transactions go into a block, again, depends on the network rules. So once the consensus is reached, the block is added. So that's the basic outline. So now let's take a look at the different mechanisms. There are again a number of them. Why are there a number of them? Because there are these challenges in blockchain. Can anybody quickly tell us what the challenges in blockchain are typically? Transaction speeds, right? Amount of time it takes to validate. Electricity consumption, scalability, all kinds of things, right? So people are trying to come up with different ways, different variations of this consensus mechanism in an effort to at least reduce one or two or all of these different challenges. So far there is not any one which works across, but then different consensus mechanisms are adopted based on type of blockchain, the type of participants in it, types of rules, and type of problem that you're trying to solve in using that blockchain in that scenario. So, and like I said, these are just a few, and there's so many that after a while, I think only time you would need to delve deep into it if you were really going to design a blockchain and adopt one, then you have to seriously think about, okay, which one would be best here. So this is the one that was proposed in the original paper by Satoshi Nakamoto, and it's called proof of work. And basically, remember that hash, the mathematical problem is that the hash has to start with a certain number of zeros in the beginning. In order to achieve that, you basically have to keep working with this random number called nonce. Excellent. And till whosoever is the first person to solve that then gets the prize or gets to validate. So that's essentially a proof of work. So miners are competing, and they're competing because they're competing. That's why there is usually that incentive associated. So whosoever is the first person to solve the puzzle, they broadcast it to all the people that, hey, you know, I got this is the nonce that gave me the hash. So other people can validate, yeah, that nonce actually did give them the required number of zeros or whatever that puzzle is. And once that is done, then block is added. So and typically, so it represents one CPU, one vote. Now that is significant. It's different from being IP based. Do you remember what an IP is? Internet Protocol. So on one computer, you can generate several IP requests, which means that one participant can have more votes than one, right? Which is not what you want. So it is based on a slightly different system. So each participant gets only one vote, and they cannot replicate themselves as being more than one, and therefore try to influence the validation process. Kind of getting there, that's okay. If we don't understand it fully, most of us don't understand all of the blockchain fully. So if that gives you comfort, please take it. It gives me a lot of comfort. So Bitcoin, original cryptocurrency, and the first implementation of blockchain used that. Ethereum before 2.0 version. And remember, I was talking about in 2017, I think it was, that Ethereum had a huge hack where they lost a lot of money. So after that, they changed the way they were operating the blockchain, and that's called 2.0 onwards. So the advantage of proof of work is that it's proven record. It's been working for since 2009 to, so almost definitely 15 years, right? So that's significant. Decentralized decision making, which is very attractive in certain scenarios, and certainly for public blockchain, it is used a lot, proof of work. Disadvantages are very energy intensive, consumes a lot of energy, because CPU power, the amount of time and effort it takes for a CPU to solve the problem is not trivial. So slower transaction and scalability is an issue. So everybody good with POW? Proof of work. Then we have proof of stake. So here also you rely on computational power, but not anybody and everybody can participate in the validation process, but it's based on whosoever has higher stake, kind of like a collateral, they get to participate. How many of those are there? What is the collateral, etc.? That depends again on the blockchain that they are operating in or participating in. But the idea is that these selected stakeholders, they are the ones that work on validating. An example is Ethereum 2.0. So because less people are used in validation as opposed to everybody, the energy expenditure is lesser. It's still significant, but lesser than POW, and faster transaction, because there are fewer people working on something, and the validation rules also may not require solving a very hard puzzle. It's faster and more energy efficient. Disadvantage, of course, wealth centralization risk. If there are people who are able to provide that collateral every time, then they can influence which transactions get validated and which get rejected. So there is always that risk. So it slightly defeats the purpose of the blockchains, completely open, completely transparent, and completely democratic. But it gains in speed and efficiency. Then we have delegated proof of stake. So then we have, proof of work, proof of stake. Then you have these different versions that mix and match kind of thing. So, so then the idea here is, instead of who has the higher wealth, it's the voting system. So the participants will vote for who will be the validators, and then they are the delegated. So, different variations. So the advantage is scalable, faster, but disadvantage is, again, that is less decentralized. Then we have this Byzantine fault tolerance. So the idea is here that the nodes are able to communicate with each other to reach consensus. It's designed for private blockchains, and it works better there because these are smaller number of participants. So think about the number of people who are participating in a Bitcoin blockchain versus a small, let's say, IBM Food Trust, which is a private type. It's actually more of a consensus, but there might be much smaller, so it's easier to work with them. So advantage is fault tolerant, meaning it's much more robust in in dealing with bad actors, low energy consumption. Disadvantage is limited scalability, because there's a lot more communication that needs to take place between the nodes. Hybrid, there's always hybrid in everything, just like we had public-private consensus, and then we have hybrid. So mix and match, same thing happening here. So you are trying to maximize the strengths and minimize the weaknesses. So the idea is that a hybrid consensus model gives us more flexibility. You can customize based on the use cases. So for a small organization in finance type, it could be one consensus mechanism, but the same blockchain. Working for, let's say, education, you might be using a different mechanisms, and so on. So the idea here is the same as any business, that if you have something, some algorithm or some process, you apply it judiciously based on what is needed and what works best for that scenario. So of course it takes more upfront development time, right? Because you have to customize. Anytime you customize, you have to be more thoughtful, spend more time upfront. But the advantage is that it results in a more robust system that works for that particular scenario and that group of participants, and minimizes the issues of blockchain. Okay, it's very complex, as you can see in the challenges, and adoption is that if it can be confusing. I think blockchains can be confusing to begin with to anybody adopting it, but hybrid model makes it even more confusing. How are we doing so far? Okay. So let's see. So Walmart, we keep coming back to Walmart supply chain blockchain because it's considered the gold standard in adoption and implementation of a blockchain. So they use permission blockchain. What's the other name for permission blockchain? Private. And the purpose there is to track the food supply in food products in a supply chain. So what is PBFT? Byzantine fault tolerance. So they use that consensus mechanism, and so that's an example of where it is used. So here we have benefits of consensus, that it gives us decentralization, more decentralization than the traditional system. Of course, as we saw in proof of stake and delegated proof of stake, for example, there is less decentralization compared to proof of work. It's more secure, more transparent, and fault tolerance, meaning that even if there is a bad node or bad actors in the blockchain, it can continue to function because of the way the consensus mechanism works in Byzantine fault tolerance mechanism. Okay, so the challenges which are still being resolved, they have not been resolved. How do you reduce the energy consumption? How do you eliminate the centralization risk that creeps in when you use proof of stake and delegated proof of stake? And how do you scale up the system? So even though Walmart, for example, is working with its partners and so on the supply chain, it still has issues in terms of scaling it up, because Walmart can afford to implement a very sophisticated system that is still pretty large and pretty big in scope. But even but that does not work necessarily for a smaller organization which doesn't have the resources of companies like Walmart or Reliance and so on. So, time for quick check. Ready? Okay. So, which of the following is a key feature of proof of work? Validators are chosen randomly. Very good. So, are the validators chosen randomly? How are the validators chosen? Everybody is a validator. The first one to solve the problem gets the prize, but everybody gets to participate. Everybody is a validator. Or they can choose not to be, but everybody has the information. If they choose to, they can. If they choose to, they don't have to. As long as more than 50% of the participants engage, we are good. Okay, so it requires solving complex mathematical problems. Okay. So, which consensus mechanism is known for its energy efficiency? Proof of stake. Why? So, there are fewer validators, so fewer computational energy is expended, as opposed to in proof of work where everybody, so if there are thousands of millions of participants in a blockchain in proof of work, imagine that. So, good. What happens if the consensus is not achieved in a blockchain network? Does the blockchain continue to add? Nope. Are validators then randomly assigned to approve the? Nope. The system reverts to centralized control. It says, throws up, I can't work anymore. So the correct answer is to B, the network halts and no new blocks are added. And then the last one is, which consensus mechanism involves community members voting for trusted validators? Delegated proof of stake. So it gets the best of the proof of stake. It removes that, doesn't remove, but at least reduces the element of wealthier people calling all the shots.